December 23, 1944. The Ardennes forest, minus 18 degrees Celsius. Snow so deep it swallowed a man to the knee. A lone vehicle picks its way along a cratered logging road, headlights taped to slits, frame creaking under the weight of 3 wounded soldiers and a crate of rifle ammunition. The driver has not slept in 40 hours. The engine coughs, catches, coughs again, catches again. A Tiger tank somewhere to the north fires, and the sound rolls through the pines like a collapsing building. The vehicle keeps moving. It is not armored, it is not fast. It weighs less than a modern family car, and yet in the coldest winter of the war, it is the only thing keeping the American line from breaking. This is the story of the Willys Jeep. For 80 years, the story has been repeated like a hymn. The Willys Jeep was a flimsy little thing, a glorified lawnmower. Underpowered, unarmored, unarmed. Something soldiers tolerated because the big vehicles could not get through. Open any popular history, scroll through any casual war documentary, and you will hear the same chorus. The Jeep was cute. The Jeep was scrappy. The Jeep was lucky to survive the war at all. General Eisenhower called it one of the tools that won the war, and most viewers treat that as sentiment, a nice line for a photograph. The real vehicles, the story goes, were the Shermans, the half-tracks, the heavy trucks. The Jeep just filled in the gaps. But here is what actually happened. If you are finding this interesting, hit subscribe. More deep dives like this are coming. The myth rests on a misunderstanding of what logistics actually is. By 1944, the American Army was moving further, faster, and across rougher ground than any army in history. The front line in France advanced over 400 miles in under 3 months. A Sherman tank burns roughly 1 gallon of fuel per mile. A heavy truck needs a graded road, or it bogs. Neither can cross a blown bridge, a shell-cratered village, or a forest track churned to soup by autumn rain. And none of it moves at all without fuel, food, water, radio batteries, maps, orders, medics, and replacement parts arriving where they are needed before the enemy arrives first. The entire American way of war, the speed, the flexibility, the willingness to outrun supply lines and bet the advance would catch up depended on one question. What vehicle could go anywhere, fix itself, carry a useful load, and be built by the hundreds of thousands? The Willys MB answered that question. 600 pounds lighter than its German counterpart, 60 horsepower, 4-wheel drive with a low-range gearbox that could crawl up a railway embankment, a 20-gallon fuel range measured in hundreds of miles, not dozens, small enough that 4 men could lift it out of a ditch, simple enough that a mechanic with a wrench and a hammer could strip the engine in an afternoon. The Germans fielded the Kubelwagen, which was lighter still and mechanically clever, but it was rear-wheel drive only, in Russian mud and Ardennes snow. That one design choice was fatal. Which means when the Germans counterattacked through the Ardennes in December of 1944, their supply columns crawled along a handful of paved roads because the Kubelwagens could not cut across country. Which means General Patton's Third Army, racing north to relieve Bastogne, could send jeeps up goat tracks and abandon farm lanes that the Germans had written off as impassable. Which means the rescue arrived days earlier than anyone on the German side believed possible. This was not an accident. This was doctrine. And the man who understood it first was not an American general. It was a British one. Field Marshal Montgomery, who distrusted almost every American innovation on principle, took one ride in a Willys in North Africa in 1942 and demanded his headquarters be equipped with them. He said afterward that the Jeep gave a commander something he had never had in any previous war: the ability to be physically present at 3 parts of a battlefield in a single afternoon. Before the Jeep, a general stayed at his headquarters because getting forward meant a staff car on a road, and roads were where the enemy expected you. After the Jeep, generals appeared at forward battalions before their own orders arrived. Eisenhower used one at Normandy. Bradley used one across France. Patton, famously, used one to reach frozen infantry positions in Belgium wearing a leather flight jacket and shouting at frostbitten sergeants to keep moving. The Jeep changed what a commander could see, and therefore what a commander could decide. The soldiers felt it differently. To the infantryman, the Jeep was the vehicle that came for you. It brought the mail, it brought the hot food when there was hot food, it brought the medic. Above all, it took the wounded out. A standard infantry battalion in the European theater in 1944 had 23 Jeeps on its table of organization. Company commanders used them as mobile command posts. Medical detachments bolted litter racks across the back and turned them into open-air ambulances. Signal units strung wire from spools mounted on the hood. Mortar crews towed their ammunition trailers behind them. One Jeep, a dozen jobs, all of them essential, none of them glamorous. Which is exactly why the mythology underrates it. Nobody writes songs about the vehicle that brought up the radio batteries. But without those radio batteries, the regiment goes silent, and a silent regiment dies. Now compare this to what the enemy was carrying. The Wehrmacht in 1941 invaded the Soviet Union with 600,000 horses. Let that sit for a moment. The army that built the Tiger tank, that fielded jet fighters, that is remembered as mechanized and modern, depended on animal transport for the majority of its supply movement on the Eastern Front. Horses eat, horses tire, horses freeze. At Stalingrad in the winter of 1942 to 1943, German supply horses died in such numbers that infantry ate them. The Kubelwagen was excellent within its limits, but Germany built around 50,000 of them across the entire war. America built almost 650,000 Jeeps. That ratio is the war in one statistic. One side sent a horse, the other sent a truck that could go where a horse could not. And the Soviets, fighting the same war in the same mud, noticed. Under Lend-Lease, the Red Army received more than 50,000 American Jeeps, along with hundreds of thousands of Studebaker trucks. Marshal Zhukov, not a man given to flattery of the Western Allies, wrote after the war that without American transport, the Red Army could not have mounted the great offensives of 1944 and 1945. Soviet commanders called the Jeep the Little Goat. They used it for reconnaissance across ground their own vehicles could not handle. When the Red Army broke into Berlin in April of 1945, the motorcycle scouts and the forward command teams riding through the ruins were, in a significant number of cases, riding American. Which brings us to the Pacific, where the myth of the flimsy Jeep breaks down completely. On Guadalcanal in the autumn of 1942, the 1st Marine Division discovered that the island's interior was a wall of jungle, mud, and volcanic rock. Trucks could not climb the ridges. Mules had not yet been brought in. The Jeep, stripped of its windshield, sometimes stripped of its seats, hauled 60mm mortar rounds up slopes that engineers had rated impassable. Marines nailed wooden planks to the floorboards to keep the mud out. They ran the engines until the oil was black, and then ran them longer. At the Battle of the Tenarue River, Jeeps moved ammunition to the firing line under direct Japanese machine gun fire because nothing else could get through the coconut grove. The vehicle the critics called flimsy was the vehicle the Marines kept alive by repairing it with whatever was in their pockets. On Iwo Jima, in February of 1945, casualty rates at the beach were so catastrophic that stretcher teams could not keep up. The Marines used Jeeps as ambulances, 2 wounded men in the passenger seats, 2 more strapped to the hood, driving across volcanic sand under mortar fire. One Navy corpsman later estimated that a single Jeep, used across 3 days of fighting, evacuated more wounded men than an entire platoon of stretcher bearers could have done in the same time. No medal was ever struck for a vehicle. If one had been, it would have been the Jeeps. And on Okinawa in the spring of 1945, when the rains turned the entire southern half of the island into a swamp, American commanders faced a choice The Japanese defenders could not have anticipated. Push forward without supplies or halt the offensive. They pushed forward, the jeeps kept moving, the Shermans bogged, the trucks bogged. The jeeps skidding, sliding, sometimes winched across the worst stretches by teams of soldiers pulling on ropes, kept the ammunition flowing to the line. None of this means the jeep was perfect. It rolled easily. A hard turn at speed on a slope could flip it, and the open body offered no protection to the crew. Early in the North African campaign, the British long-range desert group lost several jeeps simply to driver error on dunes. The vehicle had no armor. A single burst of machine gun fire would shred it. The windshield folded flat for air transport, which was clever, but when folded, it left the driver's face exposed to wire traps strung across roads by German rearguards, a trick that killed enough Allied officers that crews eventually welded upright steel bars to the front bumper. The Jeep was loud. In cold weather, the canvas top leaked. In hot weather, the engine overheated on long climbs. Critics of the vehicle were not inventing complaints, but every one of those flaws was the price of a compromise that worked. The Jeep was light because light vehicles go where heavy ones cannot. The Jeep was unarmored because armor would have doubled the weight and halved the range. The Jeep was loud because a quieter engine would have cost more and taken longer to build, and the entire point of the design was that Ford and Willys could turn out more than 1,000 units a week between them. Germany built better individual vehicles. America built a vehicle that could be everywhere. In a war fought across 3 continents and a dozen climate zones, everywhere beat better. This is where the myth of the flimsy Jeep dissolves. The vehicle was not tolerated because nothing else worked. It was chosen because the alternative, a heavier, armored, more comfortable scout car, would have lost the logistics war by existing. The engineers understood what the critics still do not. Mobility is not a feature, you add. It is the entire design. Which returns us to the Ardennes and the driver we left on the logging road. He made it through. Most of them did. In the 11 days between the start of the German offensive and the clearing of the weather on December 23, 1944, American jeeps drove an estimated 3 million miles across the Bulge, carrying wounded, ammunition, orders, and men. Not Shermans, not heavy trucks, jeeps. Small, cold, open, loud, underpowered, flimsy jeeps. The counteroffensive that broke the German attack did not begin with a tank. It began with a supply line that refused to die, held together by 60-horsepower engines and the men who kept them running. That is the lesson of the Willys Jeep. The weapons that win wars are not always the ones that look like weapons. Sometimes they look like a small gray vehicle with a canvas roof, bringing the mail. And that is why, more than 80 years later, every modern army in the world still builds a light, fast, 4-wheel drive utility vehicle as the backbone of its infantry support, from the Humvee to the British Land Rover to the Russian Tiger. The shape has changed. The philosophy has not. Go anywhere, carry anything, keep the line alive. The Jeep wrote that rule, and the rule has outlived everything that tried to replace it.